In 1945, the first nuclear explosion in human history was successfully tested in the desert of New Mexico. And in that moment, as the most destructive weapon ever created by mankind detonated before his eyes, J. Robert Oppenheimer didn't quote a scientist or a philosopher. No, instead he quoted a 3,000-year-old Indian text.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. And years later, a student would ask Oppenheimer whether the New Mexico test was the first nuclear detonation in history. He would pause for a moment, and eventually he would say, well, yes, in modern times, of course. In modern times, what exactly could such an ambiguous statement mean? What did Oppenheimer know that everyone else seemed to have forgotten? Well, buried deep inside one of the oldest epic texts ever written, the Mahabharata, there are passages that describe an incandescent column of smoke and fire as bright as 10,000 suns, soldiers whose hair and nails fell from their bodies, rivers boiling, birds turning white, and food becoming poisoned for years to come. But the craziest thing of all is that this text was written thousands of years ago, with some estimates putting these ancient Indian texts at approximately 5,000 years old. And today we are going to go through every single one of those passages and figure out, do these texts actually refer to the first ever nuclear weapon in history, or is it pointing towards something even more deadly than an atomic bomb? But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to find out more about the weapons, wars, and warriors of ancient Indian history, then be sure to subscribe to my channel, Lethal History. So let's start with the text which has the most fascinating description of an ancient weapon of mass destruction, the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is one of the two great ancient Sanskrit epics of India. It's enormous, roughly 10 times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. It tells the story of a catastrophic war between two branches of the royal family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, with the climactic final battle being fought on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And embedded within this ancient text is an amazing philosophical conversation between the warrior prince Arjuna and the Hindu god Krishna on the eve of this epic battle. And this discourse is referred to as the Bhagavad Gita, a document that even most Westerners will probably have heard of. And it is from this text that Oppenheimer will quote the epic line, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But I do need to clarify here that what the Gita is actually saying in this famous line has nothing to do with weapons, but it is the Hindu god Krishna revealing his true cosmic form to Arjuna, and he explains to him that all beings are destined to die, and that it is not weapons which decide who lives and who dies, but fate and dharma have already made that decision before anyone was even born. So this is a deeply philosophical and spiritual statement about duty, destiny, and the nature of existence itself. And Oppenheimer, who had spent years studying Sanskrit and was fascinated by Indian philosophy, used this line as a metaphor rather than as a direct statement. This was a way for him to grapple with the weight of the destruction he had just helped unleash upon the world. But although the Bhagavad Gita may not describe a nuclear weapon, there are other passages in the Mahabharata that cannot be so easily dismissed. And let me read you one such verse. Gurkha, flying a swift and powerful Vimana, hurled a single projectile charged with the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. It was the unknown weapon, the Iron Thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death which reduced to ashes the entire race. I know, right now you are probably thinking, this does not sound like any ancient weapon that you have ever heard of. But the passage gets even more disturbing. The corpses were so burned they were no longer recognizable. Their hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without any visible cause. Foodstuffs were poisoned. To escape, the soldiers threw themselves into streams to wash themselves and their equipment. Okay, so let's try to put all of this into context and try to better understand what this passage is actually describing. A single weapon delivered from a flying craft, a blinding column of fire and smoke, bodies burned beyond recognition, hair and nails falling out, contaminated food, and survivors rushing to wash themselves in rivers. I don't know about you, but to me that sounds pretty much exactly like what occurred after the atom bombs were dropped in Hiroshima than anything to do with ancient warfare. So, do these passages from the Mahabharata actually refer to nuclear weapons or warfare? Well, when researchers went back to decipher the original passage in Sanskrit, they ran into a serious problem. The famous English translation of this passage that had circulated all over the internet, had been referenced in books and documentaries, was not actually a direct translation of a single Sanskrit verse. But it appeared to be a composition of many stitched together paraphrased verses assembled by 20th century writers, particularly a 1960 French book called The Morning of the Magicians, which took various dramatic passages from different parts of the Mahabharata and dramatized them in vivid nuclear sounding English, creating a package that seemed to provide definitive proof of ancient atomic warfare. That's not to say the original texts don't contain vivid, powerful descriptions of catastrophic weapons, they absolutely do. But the specific, almost clinical sounding details, the hair and nail loss, the contaminated food, the rivers of radiation, all of these events seem to have been significantly amplified and in some cases even fabricated by modern writers keen to find atomic bombs in ancient Indian history. So what then do these texts actually say? Well, these passages are referring to one specific weapon which is called the Brahmastra. The Brahmastra is described as the most powerful divine weapon in existence, created by the god Brahma himself, and granted only to the greatest warriors through years of intense spiritual devotion and training. It isn't fired from a cannon or dropped from a flying aircraft. No, this weapon is invoked through a specific sacred mantra combined with intense mental and spiritual focus. In some descriptions, any ordinary arrow can even be charged and transformed into a Brahmastra by the right warrior speaking the right words. And when this fierce weapon is unleashed, the texts say it is unstoppable. It obliterates everything in its path, not just enemy soldiers, but trees, animals, rivers, even the earth itself. And crucially, land struck by Brahmastra is said to be barren for ages. Nothing grows, nothing lives, and nothing can survive in this wasteland. And there's a famous episode in the Mahabharata where two Brahmastras are launched simultaneously, and the god Krishna himself has to intervene, demanding that both warriors recall their weapons immediately, because if two Brahmastras collide, they will destroy the entire world. Now, does that sound familiar? Two unstoppable weapons, mutually assured destruction, and the fate of all life on Earth hanging in the balance. The parallels to nuclear destruction are striking, almost uncomfortably so in my opinion. And the Brahmastra isn't the only weapon of this catastrophic level. And the Brahmashirsha Astra is described as being 4 times more powerful than the Brahmastra. The Narayanastra summons a storm of millions of missiles simultaneously. The Pashupatastra is described as capable of destroying the entire universe if fully released. These are not ancient weapons dressed up in flowery language. They are weapons that operate on a cosmological scale with long environmental consequences that echo across generations. Which is exactly why millions of people have looked at these descriptions and asked the obvious question: did ancient India actually have this technology? And if not, how did these ancient writers imagine these effects of nuclear war so precisely? And this is where a second strand of evidence comes in, because it's not just the text. There are physical sites that believers point to as proof of ancient nuclear detonations on the Indian subcontinent. The most famous of these being Mohenjo-daro, one of the great cities of the ancient Indus Valley civilization, abandoned around the year 1900 BC, and in the 1970s a Soviet author named Alexander Grabovsky published a claim that skeletons found at Mohenjo-daro claimed radiation levels 50 times higher than normal, comparable to levels found in Japan after atomic bombs were detonated in the city of Hiroshima. This story exploded and it was repeated in books, TV shows, websites, and it eventually became one of the most shared ancient mysteries on the internet. But there's just one problem though. No peer-reviewed study, no independent measurements, no archaeological field report has ever confirmed any of these findings. And when journalists and researchers tried to trace Grabovsky's sources, they found nothing. No named scientists, no published radiation measurements, no site coordinates, nothing. The claim appears to have originated in a Soviet-era popular science book with zero verifiable data behind it. And it has then been copied endlessly by writers who never checked the original source, sounding kind of familiar to today's news outlets if you ask me. And the actual archaeologists who have spent their entire careers excavating Mohenjo-daro say that the city shows clear evidence of gradual decline, repeated flooding, resource depletion, slow abandonment, not a sudden catastrophic atomic scale destruction event. So here is where we land. The nuclear weapon interpretation of these texts is almost certainly not literally true. There is no credible archaeological evidence of Bronze Age nuclear detonations on the Indian subcontinent, and the most dramatic English passages about ancient nuclear blasts appear to come from 20th century fabrications built on top of genuine epic verses. And Oppenheimer was quoting philosophy, not citing an actual reference to a nuclear weapon when the first atomic bomb was tested in 1945. So I hope you found this video to be educational and engaging and learned something new about Indian history. And if you did enjoy this video, please do like and share it with others. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to my channel Lethal History to learn more about weapons, wars, and warriors from Indian history. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.